All right. Welcome to the August 18th, 2020 meeting of the Downtown Design Review Committee. My name is Gary Jones, and I serve as the chair of the committee. The following guidelines are in place for meetings in the council chambers of City Hall. On the south entrance to City Hall will be open for access to the building. For exiting the building, all exits can be used. Air purifying machines have been installed in the chamber. Hand sanitizers machines and disposable face masks are available if you need them. When called upon, applicants and speakers will come to the front podium to speak. Only one person at a time can come to the podium. Speak into the microphone. Please identify yourself when you are speaking. Address your comments directly to the committee, and please try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Citizens may also address the committee on the agenda items by responding to the chair's call for speakers during discussion on each item and signing the speaker login on the podium. All comments must be relevant to the item. The chair or presiding officer may, in his/her discretion, prohibit a person from addressing the committee and remove that person from the council chambers. If that person commits any disorderly or disruptive behavior, please see the agenda for more information about these requirements. If you parked in the Sheridan Walker parking garage just north of John Rex Elementary School or in the Arts District parking garage south of the City Hall, staff can provide you a parking validation ticket. The agenda and documents are located at https://okc.primegov.com/public/portal. You would then select the Downtown Design Review Committee meeting, then click on an agenda item, and the relevant documents will come up below the item. Desiree, will you please do the roll call?
Committee Member Jones.
Here.
Committee Member Brannon. Committee Member Black.
Here.
Committee Member Copeland. Committee Member Sarar. Committee Member Trujillo.
We do have a quorum, so we'll start the meeting. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the July 20th meeting. I'll take a motion to approve.
Move to approve the minutes.
I have a motion. Need a second?
I'll second.
I have a Black Copeland motion. Please vote. Motion passes. Thank you. We have on the next agenda cases withdrawn. None were withdrawn. We have a continuance request unless there's not any objections. I'll have them. We don't have to do anything on continuances, correct?
I thought we typically do.
We do?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, my fault. So I need a motion in order to continue.
I'll move to continue case CE 01075.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
And just to clarify, we're continuing it to your September 15th meeting.
Thank you. Motion passes, so CE 01075 has been continued. Moving to the consent docket, we have no items on the consent docket, so we move into individual cases for consideration. The first case is DTCA-20-00087, R2 at 20 West Oklahoma City Boulevard. Laura?
Thank you. I'll identify myself since I'm the new employee, Laura Griggs from the Planning Department, since I look so different than I did last month.
You do. Nice do.
Thank you. It
Like
got way
it.
too hot for all that hair. So this project, most of you have seen it before. It came before you a little less than 2 years ago. It's going at the corner of E.K. Gaylord and Oklahoma City Boulevard. And they're coming before you for revisions, which constituted more than 20% of the project. So it has to go back to the committee. That's how your regulations are worded. And it is going, as you can see, to the north of the parking garage that's been constructed. And it is just east of the Omni, there on the corner. And I can't remember who I got these drone shots from back in the originally, but I want to thank them for that since we no longer have access to a drone. So there's been a lot of stuff going on in that area. And I'm just going to go back to that. That's probably the best one. So we have a listing of everything that they're changing. one of the main reasons on that 20% is they're changing some of the cladding. And so they want to change, replace the metal panels with smooth finish fiber cement panels with a luminous metallic finish. And I wanted to clarify that because, metal to metal appearance is what they're looking at doing. So I referenced in the staff report, the guideline you have about fiber cement, and there's a maximum percent of 30% of the total exterior building materials on any facade. So when you look at the drawings they provided on the elevations, I had them break it down to show you which facades they go over 30% on, because that's the ones that definitely needed your action. And you can see on page 3 of the staff report, when I listed them out, it ranges from 9.4% of that material to a high of 77%, and that's going to be on the E.K. Gaylord facade. But I also wanted to reference, based on previous discussions for projects that had over 30% in downtown, the concern seemed to be when they were placed at the first floor level, when it's more eye level from both an appearance standpoint as well as a maintenance standpoint. So one of the comments that I made in here was that numerous mixed-use buildings have been approved downtown in recent years that exceed this guideline recommended maximum of 30% per facade for this material. So we've been able to see that. Not only the application of it, the appearance of it, and the durability of the project. And one example is West Village, which is multiple buildings, very large buildings, just down the street here. So staff is recommending approval of this revision, and we have representatives of the project team here. So do you have any questions of staff? Do you have, it's really hard, do you have your microphone on?
Check, check. Whoa.
There we go.
Hey.
Thank you.
Hot mic now. I also noticed that it said there's a landscaping site improvement, reduce the size of the outdoor seating.
Yes, they're changing the footprint in on the northwest corner, because there was going to be a set in there, and so they've changed the footprint. And because they changed the footprint, that's reduced the area for the outdoor seating.
I'm trying to find it.
Hang on a minute. Let me see what sheet that's on. If you look at, well, it's sheet B10 of their drawings,
Okay, I'm on.
and I'm not sure which page that is in your whole thing. In the upper left corner, you can see an area that has a red cloud around it.
Yes. Okay.
That is where it initially jogged to the south more and created more area outside the building for their outdoor seating. So they eliminated that jog to the south, which reduced the area for the outdoor seating.
Okay. Thank you.
They also changed some of the windows that I referenced because they changed the use. So they have some first floor apartment units now. So if you have no questions, the applicant representative could come up. If you would identify yourself and sign in, please. Thanks.
Yeah, my name is David Ketch. I'm an architect. I work at FSB Architects. I represent the design team today. Just give me a second, I'll sign in here. So we recently received some samples as of yesterday for the materials that we're considering using on the building, and we wanted to make sure that you could have a chance to see those materials. because we feel like that this is not, the materials are not a second choice, they're actually a better choice. So we want to make sure that everyone can see those materials. So there's actually 3 colors on the building. There you go. And even though the material itself is a fiber cement material, the finish is of a high quality, and it actually looks similar to metallic panels or painted finish that you would find on metallic panel. So we feel like this material is a good choice for the building and will not have a significant change in the appearance of the building. And as Laura had mentioned, the first floor or the ground floor area is still brick around the building on the street level.
I'm just curious, the 2 questions that I was going to ask, we're going to deal with whether it was pre-finished or site-finished and what the warranty period was, and that's
Yes.
answered here, but does this exist anywhere?
In our market?
In our market.
I have not seen this material used in our market before. It is a James Hardy product, so it is very commonly used without this nicer finish on it. So my understanding of it is that they take the product from James Hardy and then send it to the finishing plant and then have that sent to the construction site. So.
Is it open detail, like a rain screen, or is it sealed to where the weather barrier is at the finish of the?
It is similar to a rain screen.
Okay.
It's not exactly a rain screen.
But the joint?
There is a water barrier behind the fiber cement panel and insulation, and then, yeah.
The joint will be open.
The joint will be open, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Any questions from the members of the committee?
I do not have any questions.
Okay. Is there anyone else that is here to speak on this issue?
We have a representative from the owner if you have any questions regarding the design changes.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for the owner?
I am curious what landscape changes are happening. It just says it's reduced, but I was kind of flipping through the set and didn't necessarily find like a landscape plan.
Yeah, so our, what has changed is that around the Oklahoma City Boulevard facade and around the E.K. Gaylord side, those have gone from what used to be retail spaces to be apartment units. And so in those areas around there, we used to have a sidewalk where you could walk up to the front door of the retail space, and that has been modified. And so instead of having that sidewalk, we've introduced planters along there.
Okay. Any other additional questions? Thank you. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the application on the basis that the project complies with the regulations and guidelines of the Downtown Design District zoning ordinance as referenced C and D of the staff report.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. We have a Black Copeland motion. Motion passes. Thank you. The next case that we have is DTCA-22-0054 at 100 West Main Street.
Thank you. Let me get this up. So most of you have probably seen on the news that Channel 9 is moving downtown.
Saw that.
So that is what is behind this request for you today. Many years ago, before I came back, They got approval for the curved jumbotron at the corner, as I call it. And they got a variance at that time. And that has been off. I don't know if it's been broken for a while, but it hasn't been working for a while. And so part of what you're looking at today is they're going to take that down. They're going to replace it with just a south-facing flat, slightly smaller than what's there now, which means it won't have a negative impact on the hotel across the street to the west. They also have some signage needs. They're wanting to take down some of the metal canopy that you're seeing here on the west facade. And this is an existing freestanding sign that is on the north side that they're going to be removing and then replacing with one of the same size with a slightly different look. And I apologize for those slides that decided to turn sideways on me, which we just found out when we were looking through it. But in your handout you got in your packet, they were the right side up. So it kind of did it to all of them, and yes, it's comical. So let me go back to that. So as I stated, they had previously gotten a variance for the jumbotron. They do not have to get a new variance because that one is still applicable, and this one is not larger than what they got approved for previously. But because the sign is an EMD level 3 that's larger than 25 square feet, and there are other signs that are over 100 square feet, this had to come before you guys today. So in the staff report, we basically went through the entire history of what happened with this building. They've already started making some revisions to the building for the new tenant doors, that type of thing. There's some signs to get removed to be replaced with the new ones. And it actually meets everything since they've already got that variance. So staff is recommending approval. We probably could have put it on consent, but we kind of wanted to at least talk about it. And representative from the architect's office is here today if you have any questions for this project.
Are there any questions from members of the committee? I don't have, unless the architect wants to provide additional information, I think we're probably good.
I think if you have questions for her, she'd be glad to come up and answer them.
That too.
Or she can come and identify herself.
Hello, I'm Sarah Hanna with Gardner Studio. Like Laura explained, we've got a lot of changes to building signage and a slight change to the canopy structure that's there. A lot of the efforts here are to kind of give a new identity to the new building tenant and other tenants that occupy this space. And so we are just looking to seek approval for that and happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Thank you. Questions? All right, as soon as there are questions, motion would be in order.
I approve that application on the basis that the project complies with the regulations and guidelines of the Downtown Design District zoning ordinance as referenced in section C of the staff report.
Need a second?
Second.
We have a Copeland-Trujillo motion. Please vote. And I am the one not voting. Sorry. Just staring at the thing and like, ooh. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
We now move to other business. First, we have CE-01065 at 600 North Dewey Avenue.
So by way of background, because I don't think we've ever done one of these before, and let me get out of this one and where I need to get on, where's there. At your January meeting, you considered this item, you had a hearing on this item, and there was a unanimous vote for denial of this CE request. The applicant, Mr. Dow, has requested that you all reconsider, and it's technically a rescind your original vote, and he has provided some additional information. So the very first thing we're doing today, and that staff report is on rescinding your vote from January, and that is only to deal with what new information did he provide. And so what you got in your packet is you had a copy of the email from Mr. Dow requesting this, and he outlined in his email what additional information he had. You received a copy of the Business Improvement District Advisory Board minutes from July 13th, 2022, where they decided to take no action on it, and a copy of a reciprocal access agreement and maintenance agreement that he had drawn up by an attorney, and that was also included in there. And so in the staff report, I provided sections from Robert's Rules of Order, which is why we have this before you today. And the applicant will be allowed to state their case as to why you all should rescind your previous action. This discussion should be limited to the reasons why the decision should be rescinded and not get into the merits of this case for the actual CE. So if you decide to rescind the vote, the very next item on your agenda is the CE again, and that's where we would discuss the merits of the case itself. So this one is just for the rescission, and staff did not make a recommendation on this one. This is really your decision about should you rescind your vote. And Mr. Dow is here, and I'm going to ask him to come up. And Jill Burnett from the Municipal Counselor's Office is here today, representing Susan, who's out of the office this week. So we do have a legal representation here today if you have questions for her.
So is the only way to hear what we're going to discuss is by rescinding the vote?
If you wanted to actually discuss the CE and the specific situations surrounding closing the alley, that is the only way to do it. You would have to vote to rescind your denial vote from January.
So we can hear a request to rescind, but we won't hear anything specific to the case until we actually make a choice on rescinding.
Correct. The rescission is all based on what additional information has he provided.
So then here are my questions, is that if we vote to rescind, then the action that we took earlier will be rescinded. So then when we move to the action, that means we have to take a formal action either to approve or deny it once again when we go to the second item. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. If I could make the case is that I spent some time reading this, trying to figure out exactly what we were doing, and I appreciate, Mr. Dow, that you had taken the time in order to go back to the other entities in the alleyway and then try to respond to the questions that were raised when the motion was denied the last time. So for me, I thought that at least warrant a conversation about what you have put forward and whether or not that changes the decision that we made from the one we made earlier. Those were my initial thoughts.
Oh, there's just one thing that,
Can you identify yourself, Rick, just for the record?
pardon?
Like,
Oh, yes.
identify yourself,
My
please.
name is Richard Dowell. I'm at 2000 North Classen Boulevard. There's one thing that Laura forgot to mention is that we have an extra person that signed the document to close the alley. So
That's on 1066, that's the next one?
oh, that's the next one.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
we're currently, I'm sorry, I should have
Okay.
clarified. We're doing the alley, but this is between Dewey and Walker,
Right.
between 5th and 6th. So
I'm
when we
sorry.
get to the next one, we have that one additional piece of
Okay.
information.
Well,
Yes.
so that's it. So basically, we may have gotten the cart before the horse. I was kind of unexpected when we saw the president of downtown OKC show up here. I didn't expect her to show up. I'm on the bid board. She never mentioned to me she was having a problem with anything we were doing. So then we had and I can imagine how that would have prejudiced your decision. I mean, it certainly, I used to be on the Urban Design Commission, and if I'd had the director of downtown Oklahoma City tell me I thought this was a bad idea, then I would probably take heed. And I would, but however, we then went back to downtown, to the Business Improvement District Committee, and after considerable discussion, they decided that they shouldn't be making any recommendation whatsoever. So you could therefore ignore the statement that Ms. Jenkins made. In fact, she's the one that made that motion that we deny that we not make any recommendation. I think everybody on reflection felt that this was getting into very dangerous ground for the Business Improvement District to get into this territory.
And I just might mention, we have not received any written opposition to the recension or to the case itself for this side. I've just received one phone call from someone who had some questions.
Committee members, are there any questions? If not, motion would be in order at this time.
And the motion would be to rescind.
Correct.
And then go to the next step. So my questions.
I would have a question. So you would have two options, I would think, Jill. You could make a motion to rescind, or you could make a motion not to rescind.
Right, but if I've got questions about the next step, the only way to actually have those questions is to rescind and start that conversation. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. I always feel like, what's the question that I'm failing to ask, or what's the thing that I don't know that I wish I did know? There's no real downside to us rescinding at this point. Is that accurate, that we can go ahead and at least hear what we are? Okay. I'll make a motion to rescind.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a Blatt Trujillo motion. Please vote. Motion to rescind pass. So we're now actually discussing the actual action that was taken.
The next, so this is a new item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is actually the CE 01065, which is a request to close the alley between 5th and 6th and between Dewey and Walker, as shown on the screen. The information in this staff report has not changed as far as staff recommendation. We did include the proposed reciprocal access agreement and maintenance agreement that Mr. Dow has provided, was also included in this document. We also included a copy of the bid board minutes. In this particular case, the signature supporting it stayed the same. It's the next one that he got an additional signature for. So staff's concern continues to be that in addition to back-of-house needs, deliveries, trash pickup, because when you close it, an alley, and you subsequently go vacate it at district court, it becomes private property. And you could enter into an agreement, but it wouldn't necessarily be an agreement that includes the city. A person does have the right to fence off private property. Now, in this case, there is a sewer line that runs down the alley, and there's overhead electric. So obviously, easements would have to be established for those, and the ability for those utilities to maintain their infrastructure would also have to be provided. Mr. Dow had indicated previously that the intent is not to fence it off. The intent is there's a problem with homeless people in the area, and they don't have the ability to make them leave the area because it's basically public property. And they wanted the ability to have them removed from the property. There is a guideline that I included in the quotes that are in the staff report that talks about enhancement of existing circulation patterns. And so alleys are actually public. And people can use them not just to access for dumpsters and deliveries, but technically, people can use them to go from here to there. I've done that on occasion, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. But that is one of the guidelines that we have, and that is still the case here. And staff continues to be concerned with that. And similar to exactly the same as we did in January, staff is recommending that you provide a recommendation of denial to the Planning Commission for this request to close the alley between 5th and 6th and Dewey and Walker.
So, a couple of questions. Thank you for the work you guys have done on this. This one for me is just a little confusing. I understand our guidelines and role, but it's almost as if this would be a conversation that the city would have, especially since I'm assuming, again, that the intent is to deal with the homeless issue that we see across the city. And I know that this is a proposed solution, but it seems for me a little extreme to what should be a temporary problem. And I know the city of Oklahoma City has adopted a homeless implementation plan in order to respond to the issues of homelessness across the city. And I'm just trying to figure out, has there been any conversation with them if this is solely a homeless prevention issue of damage to the buildings in order to resolve this instead of going this route? That's where I've been having a tough time getting my hands around.
I don't know if that, there is a piece of the planning department that is involved in the homeless programs, and I don't know if that conversation has occurred with the property owners in this area. So I'm sorry, I can't speak to that. What I do want to make sure I circle around is I mentioned previously I had gotten a phone call from one of the property owners on this block whose concern is that he wanted to make sure that when he develops his property, that his only access will be from the alley, because his building would front out on 6th Street. And he wanted to make sure that his vehicular access wouldn't be cut off from the alley. And I indicated that, Mr. Dow has indicated that access is going to continue to be available from the alley. But as I stated earlier, staff is concerned once the CE, if it got approved and it got vacated, you do have the ability to close off your property.
I think for me, it's things, don't like putting myself in a position where down the road I'm saying, how did we get here? What was the cause that created the situation? I was going to ask how many property owners do we have that abut the alley? Is it just 3?
No. It included in his application was, he had the letter of authorization, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 6 separate properties shown, and he had addresses for all but 1.
But there's 2 buildings that, is that not correct?
Say that again?
Is there,
There's the new office building that's on the corner,
okay,
and that is the one that because that's P Drive
Sure.
Properties. That's the one I'm not seeing an address from that
and
owner.
there's a parking lot that is on 6th and an adjacent lot that is on 6th towards the center,
Yes.
that dirt area. Are there 3 lots there on 6th plus the large lot that's been developed?
I think.
Okay.
You are correct. I'm sorry, I don't
So,
have that.
so yeah, I would think
front.
that,
Oh.
I would definitely think that access to those lots would be affected. And if, there's am I correct, there's a proposed document, cross-access agreement, a proposed, not a finalized, not a formalized.
Correct, and it was attached.
Right. But it's
And
not-
so you can see the difference, if you might recall the one that he provided in January where he had like the bullet points. He has now had an attorney draw this one up.
It just hasn't been executed yet.
Correct.
So maybe it would be appropriate this time to have Mr. Dow come back and speak to us and maybe clarify some of the questions that have been raised. Mr. Dow?
Okay, well, let me just remind you some of the background. Our company operates 11 buildings in that area. It covers about 15 acres of the central business district. The first alley I closed was back in 1999, I think it was. It was an alley that goes between Hudson and Walker. And there was a large building there that had been a car agency that we were developing. It was a 67,000 square foot building. We were converting it from being a car agency to a Class A office building. Well, the thing I noticed because we had bought a lot of property in the area, the entire area consisted of vacant buildings at the time when we purchased this property from various sources. Part of it was General Electric, and part of it was the Ford Motor Company, part of it was the people that owned the Cadillac agency and a few others. And so it was an area that was totally derelict and ignored by the city. And so the first thing I noticed when we started construction on that building at 400 North Walker, which is the first building we walked on, is that there were about 20 homeless people congregating on the alley right behind the building. And of course, the parking lot for the building was going to be, you'd have to cross the alley to get from the building to the parking lot. And I thought, my goodness, there's no way that people are going to go past these people that are smashed out on alcohol or taking drugs or anything else and possibly move in. They'd be too afraid to. It would be too intimidating. Now, I lived in Chicago for a long time. It wouldn't intimidate me, but I mean, people in Oklahoma aren't used to this, and so the idea of people moving downtown is kind of a new idea. So I just came to the conclusion that deal wasn't going to get off the ground unless I did something about it. So I went to the city to answer your question about what does the city do, and I said, look, I called the police. They don't seem to take any action out here to get these people removed because obviously they're creating a problem. And the answer I got from the city attorney was that these people had a right to the freedom of assembly on any public property. And so I said, but look, these people aren't, starting a political party here. I mean, they're sitting there taking drugs and getting sloshed on alcohol, and a couple of them are so dazed they're lying on the pavement. And he said, well, it doesn't matter what they're doing. There's nothing the city can do. You can't ask them to leave at all. So then I thought, oh my gosh, this looks like the impossible dream. The city can't do anything. Do I just abandon this building and just think I just threw a lot of money away and might as well just forget it? I've just lost my money and just leave it as a vacant building, maybe whatever. I didn't think there was a solution to the problem. Then I had seen that that maybe closing the alley, taking it out of the public realm would get there. So what we did is we closed just half the alley, the part that was behind the building, but we didn't close it. I mean, you still can drive through there because we have other property owners on there. And the city maintained we hadn't any problems at all. But what it means is that right now our security people can go out there. Now, mind you, if some homeless person is walking down the alley, we're not going to ask them to do anything. What we're concerned with is people hovering around the entry to the buildings where people have to get into the parking lots and, asking for money or in some way intimidating them. And that's especially intimidating to young women when they come out of a building if people that look a little whacked out start approaching them. The behavior, unfortunately, of some of our homeless people isn't exactly sterling in this regard. So anyway, that valley, if you drive by there, you'll see the thing is completely open. Cars drive by there. You'll see homeless people walk through there. And the only time we intervene is if there's a problem. Now, the same situation still exists today. In other words, if a homeless person decides to set up a tent on a city sidewalk, the city, from the city attorney's office right now is that, well, you can't ask the people to leave. You can't ask them to move because that's city property. It's a city right-of-way. So we really have no control over sidewalks. However, alleys, especially when it's access to a parking lot from a building, that you've really got to maintain safety. Now, in this particular example, in this in this alley is that, I can understand alleys in terms of just, like lots of people walking through them all the time or congregating. Makes sense if you have retail there, where maybe retail is some of it's on the street side, some of it's on the alley side. Then that makes perfect sense as part of people's business plan. But in the case of what you see here, if you look at that diagram, you'll see what you have there is an office building on one. Now, we own half of that block. So you have an office building. If you look on the south side of the block, the one with the red roof, that's an office building. It's currently under construction. Then you have another office building right across the street from us, or right across the alley from us. Then you've got another office building of ours on the other corner. Now, that lot you see in the middle is a future place we're going to build a 100,000 square foot building, and the parking will be along the alley. So and the other property owners have the same intent, is to use the alley as access to parking. Now, what is on that street at the moment, that fronts the alley, is all office space. And that is everyone's plan. Certainly our plan is office space. So it's not going to be retail there. So you're really not taking away an amenity to the public, because after all, there's very few people that need to walk down an alley between 5th and 6th Street. It's on the edge of the central business district, and really the only real purpose they'd ever have to walk down there is just to get their car and go into their office building. And so if you don't allow us to do this, if we leave the alley open, now here's the situation. The city has a policy, and Laura can back me up on this, that normally the city does not maintain alleys, is their policy. Now, there's been some exceptions to that, but there's a possibility. For example, in the other case that will come up shortly, the city's indicated they would be willing to redo the alley, but we'll discuss that later. But normally they don't. So the property owners, though, know that when they close the alley, they're foreclosing any option that they would ever have to get the city to improve the alley. But the property owners have made the statement. There's just no one's protesting. The law firm that has that building is still reviewing this thing. So none of us can close that alley. I mean, because, for example, we wouldn't have access to our own parking. Nobody would. So there's no way that alley's going to be closed. It can't be. And of course, our agreement, to finalize an agreement there, it can't really be completely finalized until all of the actors come forward with their complaints. For example, normally the people with easements don't say a peep until you go to the county to what they call vacate the alley. This is a multi-step process, which I don't know if all of you are aware of. Normally the Downtown Design Review hasn't gotten involved, but the next step after you guys, which is just what you'll make is just a recommendation, is the Planning Commission. Then after that we go to the city. Then the city closes the alley if they agree to do it, but we're not done yet. The alley still is the property of the city. Then we have to vacate the alley. At that point, everyone that's got an easement in there is going to come out of the woodwork, and they'll have all kinds of requests and guarantees and alterations we'll have to make to this agreement to be sure they're happy, because obviously they could block the closing of the alley at the courthouse. It's not closed until it's vacated by the courthouse. So I can assure you that we have got absolutely nothing whatsoever to gain and everything to lose by that alley ever being closed. And so that's why we have this in our agreement. If you read in this thing, hang on a second. You should have it in your packet. If you look at the bottom there, it's paragraph 1.1 that talks about access easement for property owners. Now, I will say this. We probably will not proceed to vacate the alley unless every owner signs this thing, agree to it. And obviously, because we can't have easements hassled, and of course the easement people wouldn't let that happen because they own those easements and they're not about to give them up. And the courthouse won't make them give them up. So, we've got to get everybody on board. It's just this is the first step. It's a very slow process, closing an alley. Even if you approve this, it's probably going to take us a year and a half if everything goes right before we'd actually close it. It's just right now, we've really got a very difficult situation, and that situation started when we first started construction here in the end of the late 90s and the early 2000s, and we kind of did one building at a time. And in some cases, the alley wasn't a problem and we didn't need to deal with it. The reason these alleys are a potential problem is there's a service station there that sells beer. In fact, it's the only place anywhere near the bus station that you can buy alcohol. So what happens is a lot of people congregate, and the bus people don't seem to be able to do anything about it down at the bus station, and then they wander up to where that filling station is, and then they just get all over the place, and they're half stewed. And they're just uncontrollable unless our people can evict them. And of course, we're in a crazy situation. If we call the police and say, look, these people are raising Cain out here, you need to remove them, they say, look, we can't, you know, they're on public property. And homeless people aren't stupid, you know, they eventually learn that's the case, and they can tell you to go fly a kite. We've had considerable damage done to our buildings in that area, which means, for example, at night we have, I have 24/7 security. We now started our own security company called Oklahoma City Central Security, and we monitor all of our properties citywide from that one location. And so the problem we've got is we'll see something going haywire, someone's trying to break into a building off of the alley. And when the alley is a public alley, we'll dispatch one of our guys that'll drive all the way out there to tell these people to cease and desist, and then they quit doing what they're doing. They call the police and say, look, I saw this guy trying to break in, and then the police say, well, we didn't see him break in. So then the guy's still standing there, so then our security guy goes and he tries to break into the building again. You know? So it's just creating all kinds of hassles. Now, if we solve this homeless problem, probably the people would want to give the alley back to the city in the hopes that they would maintain it and we don't have to pay for it. But until we deal with that problem, we got to do something, or we'll have buildings with no tenants.
Mr. Dow, thank you. Question, Laura, just explain to me again the recommendation for the denial.
So this staff report was updated but hasn't changed since the previous one. So included in this is we always include citations from the handout,
Right.
applicable regulations, and in this case, guidelines. And so in the guidelines, there is a reference to enhancement of existing circulation patterns. Okay, circulation patterns are streets and alleys. Staff is extremely concerned with all of the numerous requests we have been getting and are continuing to get for closing alleys and closing streets because of the impact on, you know, vehicular traffic, on circulation, on getting from one point to another, on trash pickup, on deliveries. All of that is kind of all included. And I see Katie looking at me, so oh, okay, I thought maybe she wanted to add that. So that part of the staff report hasn't changed since January. And so from a design perspective, from the design district perspective, we are very concerned. And we've been concerned about all of the alleys that have come before you for quite a while.
So to make sure I'm understanding, is I totally get our responsibility when it comes to those patterns. What my question is have in the past we approved, and I thought we had, closing alleys. Have we not done that before?
We have, and I'll point one out. We had one recently.
Yes.
Where it was one property owner. This was South Classen and Southwest 6th.
Right.
The same property owner owned north and south, and it was a situation that in that block there was an east-west and a north-south alley.
Okay.
Perpendicular alleys really don't function well, and what they were wanting to do was the east-west alley. The north-south alley, from one public street to another, they weren't touching that, and that was still kind of physically in, although if you remember my pictures, people were parking and blocking it. But
Right.
And so their intent was, they've got a new building that they want to build, if you remember. And then in that case, if you look to the west, there had been a brick wall built and you couldn't get to the alley that was across the street. And it obviously did not go to the east because it dead-ended into that north-south alley. So in that particular case, because of all the circumstances surrounding it, and they were having to relocate the sewer, redesign the sewer, and relocate overhead electric, we supported that one because of the functionality of that perpendicular type alley really is not, doesn't provide for the concerns that we're talking about for the trash and the deliveries. Because if it's a 20-foot alley intersecting at a 90-degree angle and we want one of those big trucks to make that turn,
Right.
they can't really do that.
No, understand that. I'm just trying to make sure that as we make these decisions that we are consistent and what we're approving. And I'm just trying to make sure, have we ever approved anything similar to the type of response that they're wanting to make by closing the alley?
I do not recall that we've had a request come in because they haven't been able to keep their property secure
Right.
from people. But we have had several requests for very large projects where we've had alleys and streets vacated. The Convention Center, Scissortail Park. It's not the same case, but those were cases where there were numerous alleys and streets vacated. But that was for the project itself that was coming in. Both of those are it's owned by the city, it's public property, it continues to be public property.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think when we've recommended approval of these before, it has been because either the alley was no longer functional, no longer capable of being functional, or because the entire property was going to be redeveloped as one site, and those alleys would have to go away in order to facilitate that redevelopment. I'm not aware of any that we've recommended approval for where it was an open functioning alley serving multiple property owners. So kind of there are numerous different situations with alleys that we've seen, but not one that I'm aware of that is this particular circumstance.
I think prior to Katie and my tenure this time with the city, I think there were alleys that have been vacated. I think Mr. Dow has had some alleys vacated in that area, but we weren't here then, and I don't know the particulars about that situation.
I also have a question. If the primary reason for vacation is security, property damage, stuff like that, are there other options? Like a fence around your parking lot or a security guard on the block? If these are truly office managers and office buildings solely, and they basically are protecting their employees, is that an option for this area? To basically put a fence around your fence or your parking lot?
They could apply for that. We had Mr. Dow applied for a wall. And you're welcome to come up because this is more really you than me.
Yeah.
But from the standpoint of design district, they can apply for a fence as long as it meets the guidelines. He did come in and apply for a brick wall that was put in across the street from here, which was approved because it's on the property line. It's allowed. It's right next to his parking lot.
I could answer, if you want me to, some of your questions you've got right now. First of all, there was an alley closed. You might have forgotten. It was the one Mr. Hall has over there behind his apartments in the, remember?
He's speaking Fred Jones. So Fred Jones, north of Main Street, the street itself was closed to allow for West Village to be built across it. In that particular case, there was a condition when it got to council that the street, I think it's 2nd Street, had to be punched through and come out across from the old jail. I don't know if you recall that, but so that there was still a circulation pattern. Then they came in to close and vacate Fred Jones between Main Street and Sheridan. The developer had actually put all of those improvements in, and it still functions as a street, although it has been vacated and it is privately owned, but it allows them the ability to close it for special events more often than a special event permit would allow. And they still have to comply with the fire department's requirements for emergency vehicles getting in and that type of thing. So if you were to drive there today, it would look just like it did before it was vacated. And sorry, I didn't reference that. Staff had some concerns because they also closed a piece of an alley that intersected Fred Jones, but they made, and they stated they would, they made provisions that the alley is still functioning, people's trash is getting picked up, the garbage trucks can get down the alley. But there were concerns expressed by staff at that time, but that has been officially vacated.
It's worth noting that their reason for closing that alley was the same reason I'm giving for closing ours. And it's also worth noting that Mr. Howard closed a street, I think it was 17th Street, with the same argument. He was having problems. They used to have two car agencies, one across the other. And I forgot there was one street that separated the two, and they were claiming that they couldn't keep their car agencies safe, that they were having problems with people damaging vehicles. That's another one that's closed. There have been a number of alleys closed for the same reasons I've given. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And hopefully, and as I say, remember this, the property owner is taking on a tremendous amount of responsibility when he closes an alley, because he's now completely, without exception, responsible for maintaining it. And it's complicated to get people to agree to something like this. You know, it's a real pain in the neck. But we only get driven to this out of total desperation. The homeless problem right now has caused a drop in our occupancy rate in the Midtown area of 20%. And people say, well, you know, it's because of the whole business. No, not. We deal with small business. We don't rent to large companies. And we look at our other locations and our occupancy is up. It's only down downtown. And the reason that people have given us for moving is this problem. So, you know, as a landlord, they expect us to do something about it. So that's what I'm here for.
Thank you, Mr. Dow.
Is the, for Fred Jones Boulevard and West Village, that's all one ownership?
I'm sorry.
For Fred Jones Boulevard and West Village, that's all one ownership?
I believe so.
Is there anything, do we have any ordinances that deal with loitering or something other than, I mean, that this can be addressed, where if he makes a call, the owner makes a call and says, because it sounds to me like if we close the alley, essentially, he can ask them to leave, they can walk onto the sidewalk and drop, and it's right back to the exact same issue, but now it's on the sidewalk instead of on the alley. We haven't solved the issue, we've just pushed it a little bit, or pushed it to a different alley. Again, we haven't solved the issue.
And I'm sorry, I am not familiar with any of the laws we might have about loitering.
I'm just curious if there's something that if the police did come out, that it could be enforceable in a way that it's like, this is against city ordinance. It needs to be addressed, and then you have some teeth for your argument, and that would also pertain to a street front or something like that. We have the exact same thing in our office because we are in the 920 West Main, and in the parking lot behind us, there is always,
Sir,
there would be somebody.
could I just, you've got someone from the city attorney's office here. I've heard it from the city attorneys on multiple occasions that the city police do have no authority whatsoever to tell people to leave an alley if they're loitering.
I'm not seeing any ordinance against loitering on public property. Of course, if someone is in an alley, say intoxicated, you know, there are ordinances against criminal activity. You know, if they're destruction of property or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, then of course that could be, I would think, could be remedied by the police. But as far as just loitering, I don't see any ordinances against that.
So for me, this has been real tough because I'm a big, strong believer in property rights. And I believe that if a person has taken the time to buy and procure property, that we should, wherever we can, accommodate them in developing that for the use, because they're the one that have put all the skin in the game. And if they've met all the requirements, the guidelines and regulations, then they should be able to move forward. That's why I'm trying to this balance, because I know as a committee, we're responsible for ensuring adherence to the guidelines that have been developed by the City of Oklahoma City to ensure that it meets a certain standards for the area that we're responsible for. I'm very sympathetic, Mr. Dow, to everything you're saying, because I understand it's an issue that is occurring throughout the city. My hope would be, before we'd have to take an action like this, that there would be ways that the city could address this problem. But I also understand right now that you're having to address and deal with it. I think you made a great case in that there's a whole series of other steps that will still have to be taken, even if we approve this action today. So I am inclined to approve the action moving forward so that this conversation can occur. And so hopefully it raises the stakes that all the other entities that are involved in this conversation will realize that we as a community need to address this homeless issue, especially because of the adverse impact that it's having on property owners throughout the city. Motion?
So you can insert whatever, I mean, obviously staff has had a recommendation. You can take my wording that I've got and you could change my recommendation for denial if that is where you're headed. But just as a reminder, you're providing a recommendation to the Planning Commission.
Right.
They're meeting, this is on their agenda for next week.
I see it a little bit from the other side. This is where we're always going to see things from. I'm thinking about this as, is this the solution that would be for, if we address it here, it moves to another location, you address it there, and before you know it, you start closing multiple alleys for reasons other than single ownership. And the biggest thing for me is multiple ownership. You get into a situation where a property owner, I understand the cross-access agreement side of things, but you've still done something behind their property and you've addressed it. I understand that we're trying to solve a problem, but it seems to me like we're not solving the problem, we're just pushing it down the road and we're not addressing the problem. And I don't know that there should be an action to make sure that the owner can do what they want to do. I don't know if closing the alley is the way. But so it's up to the committee to make a motion and push it forward. I mean, if it's the committee's choice to push it forward, then so be it. I just see it from a little bit of the other side.
I have one more question actually for staff. If we do close the alleyway, what happens to that property? Is it just a line goes down the center and your lot just extends? Or?
Closing it does not move the property
It
line.
doesn't do it.
That's correct.
Okay, if you close it, the alley is still there. It just closes the alley. The utilities can still have access. They do allow closed alley easements to be fenced because that has happened in other parts of downtown. But the lot line doesn't officially move until you vacate it, and then you actually would have a new deed
Okay.
recorded. And that's a step that doesn't happen a lot.
So if it is closed and it does not get vacated, what happens? Who's responsible, I guess?
Well, it's still a public alley, and I think Mr. Dow had indicated that even if it's closed, I believe, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, that action in of itself doesn't do what he's trying to do, which is allow them to have the people removed from the alley, because it's not private property yet.
Can it be closed with condition? Did you have another
That's what
question?
I was gonna.
I do.
Please go on.
My other question is, I appreciate the maintenance agreement, or the maintenance agreement that was written. But to me, it's not really anything until there's signatures on it too. I don't know who's for this, who's against this, besides who has told us in letters. And I feel like this affects more than just one owner, obviously. And that's also where I struggle with the multiple ownership of, okay, I understand this affects your property and you want to change. And I wish change for you. that there's no damage done to your property, but I don't know, I just am not, I feel like I'm not hearing the whole picture, the whole story, without the voices of the other owners.
Well, the thing is, the voices of the other owners are given because they've signed the alley closing petition. The only one left, and there's no one signed a protest. So in this particular case, you've got unanimity. We've got, I think, 5 property owners there. So if someone had a problem with this, they'd be down here protesting.
So,
Where is that list? Do we have that?
So in your packet, there was, it was entitled Letter of Authorization, and that was turned in by Mr. Dow with his application. That follows the warranty deeds. And so listed on there, you see all the different different properties. Several of them are Mr. Dow's. So it's 2 pages, and it shows 6 different, but for example, number 1, Mr. Dow owns 1 and 3. So he owns both of those. Property number 2, which is P Drive Properties, that's the new office building at the corner, who have the parking lot that actually have an access off of 6th and the alley.
Sorry,
You might
that-
remember, that's the one that had the big retaining wall that we had a lot of discussion on.
The maintenance agreement I was looking at was blanks, but I was just notified there is signatures.
Right, so according to this list, if you look at the map, and hopefully you can see my arrow going on the map, okay, the only property, and I'm kind of outlining it, this corner is the only property he doesn't have a signature for on that block.
and if I was correct, is that it's not that they were opposed to it, they hadn't made a determination to sign it yet, is that correct, Mr. Dow?
Yes, they have a copy of this thing. They're reviewing it. The reason I'm just pressing forward is I think people are getting tired of this thing getting continued, so I'm hoping that by the time we go to the Planning Commission, they've signed the agreement. I mean, or, you know, they've signed the final document here. Now, the alley closing agreement, we really won't know if we've got that right until the people with the easements come at us, and they may want assurances that they feel aren't quite 100% in this thing. You never know until we get there.
Correct, thank you, Mr.
So
Dow.
before we finish this, and I know he's actually here for the other block, but I think you probably need to ask, yes, if someone else wants to speak.
Billy Lewis. I'm an attorney and I own the Goodwin Lewis building that's in the next block. I also represent the owners of 4 or 5 different properties. They're in that letter you got there from our, and I know we're not exactly talking about our property, and I was going to hold my comments until we talked about that, but I think there are a couple things to note. Closing the alley simply changes who's responsible for maintenance of it, but you can't close the alley, and if you close the alley without the cross-access agreement agreed to, ultimately, she's correct, it's going to revert back. He's going to get it, if he gets it closed, it's going to revert back to the property owner line down the middle of it, changes the property lines, and then there's no maintenance agreement on who's taking care of the alley. The city no longer takes care of it, and as you guys have pointed out, the multiple property owners is the problem, because you'll have some property owners that take care of their portion of the alley, but they're not going to take care of someone else's portion of the alley. Then you've got possibility without that easement signed before they come here, where everybody agrees to that cross easement. Like in my property, I have parking in the back. If that easement is not signed before this alley is closed, there's the possibility I get cut off from my parking. There's also security and safety issues because the EST building has emergency access for in fire, they have emergency access doors to the alley. They are doing this completely out of order. They need to get all the property owners on board. When you have this many property owners in a lot, before you can come to this and say, hey, let's go ahead and close the alley. I'd also point out that point blank, I just heard that when I was sitting here. Point blank, Mr. Dallas told me he wants to fence this to keep the homeless off. So that idea that this isn't going to be fenced, that is not true. He's told me point blank. The other part is running off homeless people from the alleyway is not a consideration that is in the DRCC guidelines. This is this is a huge problem all around town. I get it. But this is taking a shotgun to an ant by closing a public alley to simply because you want to run homeless off. And frankly, that's kind of offensive that they would take this position that we need to close the entire alley because we've got homeless people sitting in it. That's unbelievable to me, and that is a horrible precedent for this committee to set. So anytime anyone has a homeless person in their alley, okay, let's just close the alley. Then the next one gets closed, like my property. Then a street down gets closed. Then another street. And all of a sudden, we don't have alleys anywhere because of a homeless problem. That's unbelievable to me that that's the position that they're literally taking with this committee, that, hey, we've got homeless people. Let's just close the alley. There's nothing in the guidelines, and you know the guidelines better than I. There's nothing in the guidelines that say running off homeless people from the alley is a legitimate consideration to make a recommendation to close the alley. I have more on my section in particular, but I think this sets a really bad precedent moving forward in this case. So I would just address those points that kind of tackle both, but then I have many more points, and I've been authorized to speak on behalf of 5 different property owners. They've said they're never going to sign this cross-access agreement that he's proposed for the next section over, but I'll hold those comments if we get to that.
So hang tight just one second, because I want to just address what he said, and you're fine. Your comments are making my case a little easier to say, and your comments are also, although they're about your case specifically, it's definitely it's applicable. My curiosity was there any way that we could have any kind of a motion with some specific considerations that all we're trying to do is give the owner the ability to address the issue, but it sounds to me like that's not available to us, because closure of the alley was not what I was looking for. I was looking for something that closure only with respect to the ability to X, or closure only with the
You can always clarify issues, motions, votes, and we have had in the past on different cases, not on one like this, where you literally, we recently had one on the demo where you guys clarified why in that case you were voting to approve that CA. You might, was that, I apologize, that wasn't you. I had another, design review body that, no, it was you guys. It was on South Walker, Tony, where you clarified why you were voting. So you can always clarify why you're voting a certain way. You don't have to be totally generic like my recommendations are.
So you guys can include any additional specific comments, either justifications or additional kind of recommended conditions as part of your recommendation. You don't have to just recommend approval, denial. You can say we recommend approval or we recommend denial on the basis that or with the condition of
Or with the
forward any of those
concerns.
comments on to planning.
We recommended this, but we have these concerns,
Yeah.
or whatever.
We don't encourage it, but we have had bodies forward things on with no recommendation, but just with comments.
Can we recommend denial with comments?
Yeah?
Yes. So that was what I've been trying to get to. My whole reason for this is we need to send a message throughout the city that it's unfair that property owners are having to take these drastic actions in order to deal with the issue. Again, is what I don't want to do is to set some type of precedent, so that's why I asked about those, because that's something you don't. We have a responsibility to make sure we're doing the guidelines, but at the same time, I just think that we, as not only the members of this committee, but as citizens of this community, need to understand that we hear there is an issue, and the city of Oklahoma City, you need to take this seriously and work with our property owners to find solutions that make sense. So here's the other thing, Laura, is I feel that I needed to step up being chair. The one thing I miss not being chair is being able to be proactive and doing motions and stuff.
Well, you can do seconds, you just can't make the motion.
Thank you, Laura.
Sorry.
You can always say, I would entertain a motion to, and then say the whole motion, and someone
Thank
else
you.
can then repeat it right back to you.
Okay.
I believe the applicant wanted to make a
A
statement.
comment. That is true. Thank you.
You wanted to make
Mr.
a
Dow.
comment back.
Well, first of all, let me say this. I'm not an attorney, but I've been in 45 lawsuits, and I'm 75. And I'm going to say one thing, the gentleman that just spoke, although he is an attorney, he's never closed an alley. So just a couple of things I have to say, having paid a lot of tuition to these folks. First of all, if a person were going to do something that would constrain a person's access to their property, there is no way in the world that the district court is going to allow that alley to be closed. So his concern on that front is non-existent. The idea that there's some kind of chaos is being created by alleys that have been closed for the reasons I've given, I don't see any evidence of that anywhere, frankly. I mean, you can just drive down the area I speak of. Do you see people having problem getting from point A to point B? What you do see is we have a building that I could get occupied. What you see right now, is people leaving buildings because of safety. Now, the thing that gets me is this homeless problem is not something that we have solved in 20 years, and we're probably not going to solve it in another 20. But unfortunately, in the life of a building, they have a depreciation rate of 3.6% a year. And you multiply that and compound it times 20, you've lost half the value of your building before we deal with this problem, if we ever do. And there's no guarantee of that.
Sorry, is it on? Okay. My concern with everyone else in the committee, or, me particularly, is once we close an alley, everything else that follows, everything else that is going to come through is going to have to go through other venues, whether represent the city. But at the same time, it doesn't solve the issue. To me, it does not do anything at all to come forward, and then we don't have an agreement from the property owners adjacent to this alley. So I agree with everyone in this committee that it's not going to do other than just bring up another situation and another one and another one. So to me, it's just not worth the effort for this particular alley to be closed. I think the effort should be used somewhere else, as everybody has mentioned, with the city coming forward and doing something about it. And it's just, the precedents that we're going to set, it's more detrimental to the city, in the way that I look at it, versus just closing this one alley. So.
Well, it seems like, look, I mean, here's the thing. I understand the situation you're in. I mean, it's like when I was on the Urban Design Commission, we had guidelines. And you said, okay, we're supposed to make a ruling based on these guidelines. But then the question is, why do we have guidelines? Why are we doing what we're doing? I mean, there's a bigger thing that's going on there. I mean, the reason you have guidelines, the reason we have ordinances, we have this, is we're trying to develop downtown. Now, if you feel like you have to rain on our parade because of the guidelines that you have, probably the best thing for you to do is say, look, from the standpoint of our guidelines, we think we should do one thing. From the standpoint of just the case Mr. Dowell's made, maybe something else should happen. So I understand the dilemma you're in, but I mean, unfortunately, I found while I've been in business, in fact, when I was a professor, and you get a lot of curveballs thrown at you. As it's often said, that judges write 90% of all laws because laws are usually so ambiguous you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. And so I appreciate that. But I just say this just as a person that's trying to make ends meet here, if we can't get control of the situation real quick, we've got a disaster.
So for me, my hope is that someone would make a recommendation based on the staff's recommendation, because I get the argument about the circulation pattern, and I totally get that. I would love for that motion that the staff has recommended to include, however, we understand that property owners are facing a challenge that the city of Oklahoma City should be trying to address.
I'll make a recommendation of denial to the Planning Commission for the request to close the alleyway lying between North Walker Avenue, Northwest 6th Street, North Dewey Avenue, and Northwest 5th Street, with specific acknowledgement that the issue of homelessness is causing a burden on property owners across the entire city, and that anything that creates a hardship that the owner doesn't have the ability to address and that the city does not have the ability to address needs to be brought to the forefront, and it needs to be solved in a manner that supports all of the citizens of Oklahoma City. To the degree that the Planning Commission can address that or forward it, then that's included in my motion.
Second wholeheartedly, because I can second, right?
Yes, you can.
We have a motion and a second. Blatt Jones, all those in favor? Vote please.
Thank you. And staff will listen to the meeting so that we can get all of that verbatim, because I tried, but I can't write that fast.
Okay, we're still waiting for the vote to publicly.
Actually, didn't I? I thought I saw. It popped
Popped
up
again.
there already, but
Oh, it did?
that's the only reason why I said something. I thought I saw the vote up there.
Desiree, are we good? Oh, there it is. Motion passes. Sorry about that, Laura. Continue with your comments.
It's flipping really, really fast instead of stalling up there for some reason, but I did see it. Thank you.
Okay, next under other business, we have CE 01066 at 600 North Walker Avenue.
And as soon as the screen changes, I will pull up the, there we go. Dang it. I wanted to pull this. So similar to the last one we had, the very first case we're considering is the request to rescind the vote. The additional information that you have is the minutes from the bid board that we had for the last one, is the reciprocal agreement, similar one for last one, but they're two different ones. And in this case, there was an additional signature, and I highlighted in yellow on the list of signed, the additional property owners that signed the signature. You had at your places today, we received yesterday afternoon, a letter of opposition that specifically references the request to rescind, which is why I'm bringing that up to you. And the author of that letter is here, Mr. Lewis. And so you do have that in front of you. So once again, this is for the alley that is between, to the next block to the east. So this is between Walker and Hudson, between 5th and 6th. And what we're doing today, right now, once again, the applicant will be allowed to state why you should rescind your previous action from January. And that discussion is limited on what is new, just like we did on the last one. We're not discussing the actual CE yet, just what new information which you all should consider for this case. And Mr. Dow is here.
Mr. Dow?
Can I ask one? Our options are motion to rescind and take no action? Or is there a formal motion to not rescind?
You could do that,
Available.
I believe.
Correct?
You could do a motion to rescind, and then that would allow you to have the discussion like we had on the last one. You could do a motion not to rescind. If you took no action, that's the same as not rescinding, but I mean, that's always an option. That just isn't a confusing way to me to get to the same point, but.
Didn't know if you could make a motion not to rescind with conditions.
Well, I think the problem with that one is we're not discussing the case. So if you put conditions, the conditions would have to be on the recension itself, am I correct? So I don't think you can do the same thing you did with the last one if you vote not to rescind.
If you want to put conditions on it, I think the best course of action would probably be to do what you did on the last item.
So if I could, my hope is that, and I just want to be forward, is that, and Mr. Dow, we've heard your comments, and I know we need to give you an opportunity to speak again, but on this is that we could rescind, do the motion again with the motion that we did the last time in order to send the message to the Planning Commission and the city that this issue needs to be addressed, because we have the same issues and actually even more issues as was presented in the letter that we received from the law firm concerning the denial.
The only thing I think is if we make a motion to not rescind, then we might have somebody who might want to enter something formally into the record.
Got
Well, the letter of protest from the other property owner who's in the audience specifically referenced your rescind action. So I believe he would have an opportunity to speak about rescinding, because in that letter that you all received, I believe it specifically says he was requesting you guys not rescind it.
Correct. Thank you. So that does allow us to be able to enter that information into the record, correct?
For that letter of opposition, because he referenced the rescission.
So,
But we can't really discuss the CE case. We're just discussing the new information that's
recension.
provided.
correct.
So one other comment would be that if we vote not to rescind, then there is no opportunity to forward any additional comments on this CE onto the Planning Commission.
Correct.
Because I don't think we're going to send them something saying we chose not to rescind this.
There's just no
I
communication
think
on it at all.
going ahead and rescinding, having the discussion, acknowledging that a lot of it is repeat of what has already been discussed, but then still forwarding on a recommendation on this CE as well is probably the most effective way to communicate the committee's concerns.
Thank you. Yes, sorry about that.
Billy Lewis again. This one, we would encourage you not to rescind your earlier action for the reason that I think this one is much more disputed, and it sends a stronger message to the Planning Committee that you don't want this alley closed from the beginning. But as on the rescission per se, there's been the same items that came before this committee in January were the lack of uniformity and agreement and the protests from the adjoining property owners, multiple property owners, the entire first half of the top, more than half the block on the north side.
So, and I'm sorry, because I know you're an attorney, and I don't like interrupting
No, you're
attorneys,
fine.
but the oppositions we received to the CE were not attached to this staff report, because we can't really talk about the CE. You are correct, we did receive them, but that's not part of the discussion on the recension.
On this particular item, are we really limited to just hearing the differences between the previous?
Correct, correct.
Not-
And the reason that you received his objection letter is he referenced not to rescind the vote. Right, so we got 3 new pieces of information, the agreement, so he could discuss the agreement, the new signature, and the bid board minutes is what you received.
The bid board minute, I'm part of the bid board as well. We voted, in fact, I think it's either me or another one that encouraged to take no action against it on the bid board itself. The problem was the bid board, primarily, the bid board has 2 bid board members with opposing views on this same issue. Bid board thought it was inappropriate to take any action because it looks like you're, and in fact, Mr. Dowd's in that meeting was, it feels like you're taking sides. And so the bid board made no recommendation on this issue. As to the new signature, they got one more signature of the vacant parking lot, but I would again point out the easement, which was the revised easement, has not been signed. I have not seen a single signature from any person on that entire block that signed the easement. And so we still have the same concerns that we had in January, which there's no cross-access agreement, there's no agreement to get across it. I am a real estate lawyer as part of my trade, have been for 20 years, and I can assure you, if this is vacated and there's no cross-access agreement, the only way for me to get back to the back of my building where there's parking is I have to file a lawsuit and spend more money to open that, to have an easement by prescription, is what it's called, across it. So what I would say is, of the 3 new pieces of information, there's not enough there to rescind your earlier vote. The same concerns and the same reason this committee voted against it are still present as we sit here today. There's been no change in circumstances. I would encourage you to keep your earlier vote, not rescind, because I think it sends personally, I think it sends a stronger message to the committee that this one should not be closed.
So are there any questions for Mr. Nelson? Okay, seeing there are not, Mr. Dow, you have an opportunity to speak.
Look, I can understand your thoughts here that you think you don't want to go through listening to all this stuff all over again that we've just been through, and I can appreciate that. I think the best thing to do, this would be, and I would be attentive to this, is just, first of all, there are some new pieces of information. There were the 2 you already know about in the previous, but in this one, in addition, you've got a new person that has signed the agreement. So we are now 65% of the block is wanting to close the alley. So that's the change. Before it was like 51%. So now it's definitely, quite a substantial majority. So I would be amenable for you to rescind the thing, have your vote just like the other one. There's no need to listen to us wasting your time for an hour and a half here, and just make the same recommendation on this one. But if you just don't listen to it at all, then you're leaving yourself open. If I go to the Planning Commission that we had new information they weren't willing to entertain. So that might make you look bad. So I think if you just did the same thing with this one you did with the other one, I'd be amenable to that, and I'm sure Mr. Lewis would like to get out of here as well. I'd be okay.
And I just wanted to point out on the signature, because you were, where it, hopefully you all found it, where the yellow shows the new property owner that signed.
Didn't see it, but I take your word for it.
Pardon?
I didn't see it, but I take your word for it.
Okay, I just wanted to point it out so that you didn't
Thank
miss
you.
the fact that he did have another
I
signature.
just-
So members of the committee, comments?
I have a question. So is the argument to close the alley, again, the same issue with homelessness, or is it
We're
something
not
different?
discussing the merits of the closing. We're actually
Right.
discussing the new information to decide if you're going to rescind the vote. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I will say for me, while it does raise the percentage, I don't think it changed the ultimate issue for me is that you want unanimity, or at least I could go with everyone but one, and then they were still pending. But if there is opposition, then I don't see how it changes for me.
I would agree, and with respect to, I understand the comment of if we don't make a statement, it looks like we didn't want to engage you, but we just did. And I think from the standpoint of, we just went through this, I think our previous statement about the homelessness issue does not necessarily have to be redundant in order to be just as effective. I'm not necessarily forwarding any kind of motion on this.
Is there any motion? Seeing as there are no motions, then we will move on to, and I guess we don't need to move on to the next case because it was not rescinded.
So just to confirm with the attorney, so if we have no motions, so they're taking no action, so the denial from January stands on this particular
That's correct,
case?
yeah. the item-
Okay, so
Right.
we are not taking up the next case because we didn't rescind your vote.
Thank you.
Okay.
So next on the agenda is communications. We had administrative approvals. Does anyone have any questions for staff? Seeing as there are none, we move to comments from planning department staff. Laura and company.
We have a meeting next month. We had a new 12-story building come in Tuesday. So please look at your calendar. Make sure you can make it.
Who?
It's been in the paper.
Okay, just as long as it's not me.
No. No, it's not you. So you will be getting probably a very early quorum call just to confirm you can be there, because rescheduling a meeting takes a lot of time and gets complicated, and we try not to delay projects. So thank you all for being here today. I was getting a little worried when we had one drop out at the last minute yesterday. I'm like, oh, please, I need the rest of you to attend. So that's why you got that second pleading email from me, that I kind of needed you here. So thank you for showing up today.
Thank you, Laura. Are there any comments from the committee members? Seeing as there are none, I already made an announcement about the next meeting, which is Thursday, September the 15th. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.